Right now, and this is kind of one of the themes, I think, for the day, both in my words, the Senate presidents and the governors, the state is on the front lines of dealing with the areas where the federal government has continued to fail. One thing I love about the Florida legislature, and I think it's on display today, is that we are a functioning political process where people can participate and where we truly engage with each other to solve problems. We're seeing new fronts and new fights that have been created by the failures of the federal government to lead. And it's a federal system that is broken, not a Democrat problem or a Republican problem, but a problem for Floridians nonetheless. Here in Florida, we have the ability to get it right. We work together in a cooperative fashion, bipartisan way. And when we do things that are partisan, usually our dialogue is better. You had a lot of questions about stimulus money for the Senate president, I think earlier this afternoon. And I'll say this about that. I don't want Washington to rescue Florida. DC has not shown that they are a model of good government. I will take our process over the things and how they do things in Congress, which is consistent gridlock, and usually nothing happens and nothing gets done. We can address the problems and find solutions, but if you see the common theme of what's happened over the last several weeks and several months, both with myself, the Senate president, the governor, is that it's constantly us having to step in for things that the federal government has failed on. They failed to deal with accountability with research institutions, as certainly the Congress has, when it comes to accountability on China, which we rolled out earlier this week. On data privacy, we're stepping up where the federal government has failed to really engage. Big tech transparency, we're stepping up where the federal government has failed to engage. On flooding, we're stepping up where the federal government has failed to engage in the kind of localized projects around resiliency that we need to truly help our communities. Around workforce, much of the problems that you saw on display in our Education and Workforce Committee a couple weeks ago, a lot of those come from the strings that are attached to workforce money that comes down from the federal government, and the federal government has seemed unwilling, at least to date, to upend that process. Those are the kinds of things, those kinds of points are going to be the things that we're going to work on during the course of this session. They're real problems that affect everyday Floridians, and we're going to engage in a way that is cooperative and transparent to accomplish great things on behalf of Floridians. So with that, I'll open it up. Yes.
So, this seems to be a shift in tone here. You're talking about things that the federal government is doing. We didn't hear this, say, a year ago. Why is that? I mean, did this just start on January 20th?
No, I think you're hearing about the things that the federal government's not doing, right? So when I'm talking about they're not engaging on China, they're not engaging on big tech, they're not engaging on data transparency, they're not engaging when it comes to the resiliency on local projects. They're not helping us when it comes to upending the current structure of the workforce problem. So what I'm saying is what they're not acting on. These are problems that we have in our state that we need to solve problems. And we can't wait for the federal government to act, because whether it's the nature of that process, I don't think anyone in this room would argue that Congress is a functional body.
So Congress is not a functional body, that because it kind of sounds like we're setting the predicate for congressional.
Really, because really what I'm talking about, Gary, are issues that are important to everyday Floridians. And what we're saying is that when the federal government's not going to solve a problem, we are going to step in and we are going to solve the problem. Gary, I have no intention to run for Congress.
Can you talk about the federal stimulus money in reference to that?
Sure.
There is a problem that Florida has, and that is that its unemployment compensation fund is empty.
Yeah.
And are you interested in doing what the Senate president suggested, and that is using federal stimulus money to fill that hole and not have to impose taxes on small businesses?
Well, as I've answered your questions before, Mary Ellen, on this topic, I am concerned about raising taxes on business. I saw the Senate President's comments today. Part of this, the federal stimulus is all speculation at this point. We believe it is coming, right? We believe it is coming. What we don't know is the kind of strings that are going to be attached to all of the provisions. So we'll take a look at it. It's a budget conversation. Much of the federal government money that came down in CARES, as you know, much of it was siloed. What I'm being told is that that will be less so in this next round. But until we see it, it's not something that we make decisions on.
The governor had a lot to do with allocating the money given by the CARES Act. Will you commit to have the legislature keep track of the next round of federal funds and not give so much responsibility to the governor to allocate that money?
Well, we're in session, so we'll be allocating the money through the budget process.
Another follow-up to something Senator Simpson said today, and that is as it relates to minimum wage and accelerating the minimum wage for, is that an option or an option for something that you at all in doing along the lines of this discussion?
I think you're talking about it in context of state employees. I think the president's comments were in the context of state employees and minimum wage. Look, anything the president wants to talk about, we're happy to look at. One of the things I am curious about and have been curious about these last several weeks is we've had state agencies who extended their time where their employees are working from home, so they're not coming into their agency to work. So I want to know a couple of things about that. I want to know what does the productivity level have been based on people not being at work, and if the productivity level has remained, high or on par with what we had before, then are we going to take a look at these kind of legacy buildings that we have for these state agencies? Can we begin to downsize, some of those structures? So I think all of that is part of the same conversation.
That's the other component that the Senate President says that because the state ultimately reimburses them for Medicaid, that those minimum wages should also be reimbursed.
Look, I think all of us would love a scenario where, people who work with vulnerable populations, we also have, workers who we've tried to do pay raises before in the past who work with disabled children or disabled adults who are low-paid workers. And when unemployment is very low, right, it's extremely difficult for people to get individuals to do that job. Those are all things we've tried to engage in the past, and we'll continue to try to engage in. I think part of this, though, is a budget conversation. As you know, Mary Ellen, we don't look at anything in isolation. Right? Any of us can pull one thing out of the budget and say, sure, we'd love to do that. The question is, what are the priorities and what can we afford to do in a particular budget cycle?
There's a good bit of discussion about Visit Florida's role in the pandemic. Here's what your thoughts on that are, and also your thoughts on that Senate bill to get rid of the sunset date.
Yeah. Look, I think this is the perfect role for Visit Florida. Is to let people know, when it's safe to come to Florida, when it's safe to visit, that we're open for business, that our businesses are open, that our hotels are open. I thought that they played a valuable role during the oil spill, doing some of the same things, right? People were canceling reservations in Clearwater Beach for an oil spill that, of course, didn't reach Clearwater Beach. But the perception was there's oil on the beach in Florida. So I think that they play a very valuable role in making sure that the rest of the nation and the rest of the world, potential visitors, know that when they're able to get here, that we want them here, we want them to visit, we want them to eat in our restaurants and stay in our hotels.
So spring break is,
About the $2.79 billion budget shortfall that we're facing right now, one way to get over that is the extension of the FMAP that's done by the Biden administration. There's limitations on how often you can extend it, getting in paid. This money that's coming, Biden's promised,
Yeah.
the governor is expecting it. I mean, how is that going to play into this, or are you aligned with Senate President on potentially cutting Medicaid rates, provider rates?
Yeah, listen, it's all the same part of the same budget conversation. I think one of the things that's going to be a challenge until we understand what it is the federal government's going to do, whether it's on the FMAP or on the stimulus, is, how much are they sending? What is the formula? What are the strings that are attached to that money, and what does that mean for us? And until we know those things, there's no way to adequately answer that kind of question.
Will those answers come during the next 60 days, or are you guys going to move forward anticipating that $3 billion hole?
Sure. Well, two things. Ideally, yes, right? But we don't control that, right? The federal government controls that. But the second part to your question is we have done things in the past. I'm not suggesting we would do it here, but we have done things in the past that are contingent. If this happens, then we would do this. And we can do that in our budget. Certainly doing it to the tune of multiple billions of dollars probably isn't the most responsible thing to do. But we can have elements that are contingent. We've done that in the past based on FEMA reimbursements and things like that.
Say on the unemployment compensation connect system, so trouble.
Yeah.
There was a blocking price tag put on
Yeah.
by the government to replace it. I'm wondering, would the House go along with that? In the vicinity of maybe $100 million?
We all agree that the Connect system didn't work, right? Certainly in the way it was intended to work. I think that one thing I'm cognizant of, and seems to be a common theme in state government, is we have technology infrastructure issues, right? We have on multiple fronts, on multiple things. And then to the extent that we have, legacy systems throughout the state, a lot of times they don't talk to each other, which doesn't make them very compatible. So one thing I am cognizant of when we're talking about something as large and as big a price tag as Connect is how does that interface with everything else and what are our problems? I feel like when we talk about various technology issues, we do it, let's talk about the Connect system. Let's talk about the court system. The reality is it's like talking about the human body and saying, oh, we're only going to focus on the liver. We can't do that, right? We have to focus on the whole thing. And we've done, I think we have not done a great job in making sure that our technology infrastructure works well together. Additionally to that, I think now the extra wrinkle, right? And if you're from certainly my area in Pinellas County, we had the city of Oldsmar where their water utility was hacked several weeks ago. That was essentially taken over and chemical levels were changed. And here's a critical piece of infrastructure, right? This is people's drinking water. That can't happen. That can't happen. And what that shows us is that we have vulnerabilities throughout the state on things like cyber. So when we're talking about our technology, we also can't talk about the efficiency and effectiveness of our technology without also talking about how are we going to defend ourselves from what is probably going to be a continuous cyber threat. And that's something that I think we need to work on. As you all know, last year there was a task force that got together that issued a report about cybersecurity specifically. And we're looking at that report and looking to address some of our cyber needs in the state. Sure. Well, listen, I mean, we talked about this, organizational session, right? I said we have to really rethink whether or not we should subsidize every single degree to the same degree, right? And I think this has been kind of framed in a way that I think is not terribly helpful. We as legislators are here as stewards of the taxpayers' money. We heavily subsidize higher education in our state. It is the reason that tuition in the state of Florida has been so affordable, and we want it to be affordable for middle-class families. But we also have to be accountable for the money that we are spending. So, for example, Gary, here we are, through this pandemic in the last year, and we have a mass shortage of nurses in the state, right? Everybody thinks we need more nurses. We all want to invest in nursing education. So, if two 18-year-olds enter higher education at the same time, and one wants to study French, 16th century French poetry, that's awesome. But if I have an individual who wants to become a nurse, I really need them to become a nurse. As a Floridian, I need them to become a nurse. As a taxpayer, I need to become a nurse. Or I need them to become a nurse. As somebody who might be in the hospital, I need them to become a nurse. So when we're talking about that, and we say we shouldn't subsidize every degree to the same degree, is that the individual who's going for nursing, maybe they should receive more because they're a person that we need now in the state of Florida. That's the point.
We are investing in you and the return, the expected return that you later on. Isn't that a fundamental shift in that program?
I think I missed the second part of that, but what I think you're asking is, it's a promised benefit, right? So, number one, we've changed Bright Futures in the last couple of years since I've been here, right? So we have tinkered with Bright Futures in the last several years. We did it under President Negron and Speaker Corcoran. So that's not unusual. I do think we need to be cognizant of somebody who's a high school senior or something like that. But also remember, this is about major selection in undergraduates, right? It's not about even messing with the scores or those kinds of things. We're talking about when you get there. When we heavily subsidize somebody's higher education, is it the 18-year-old who's arriving on campus that is the tail that wags the dog? Or do the taxpayers have some conversation there to say, hey, our priorities in the state are these? These are the things that we need in the state to properly function, and therefore we're willing to subsidize those more. And if somebody wants to get less and go to study for something that might not be high demand, but they feel passionate about, that's part of choices. I grew up in a middle class family. I went to get my bachelor's degree, and I had made a decision. Did I want to go to law school? Not a surprise to anyone that the debt load is significant. It's significant. I made a choice. Right, and I bear the consequences of that choice. So, we want tuition to be affordable in the state, but we also want to have a conversation about what kind of folks do we need in order for our economy and our state to run as effectively as possible and be accountable for the dollars that we spend in higher education.
Speaker, the state or the other programs that you go through, we know this is where you go through law school and you work for the state will not make you pay for the law school. If you serve the state, then
Yeah.
Would that type of program work in this environment rather than spending money that they get?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be affordable. To be honest with you, look, you brought law schools, I brought law schools up, so we'll use that as an example. It's a massive cash cow, It's a massive cash cow for the universities who have law schools. We have 10 law schools in the state of Florida. The average graduate, it's much higher at the privates, right? But the average graduate is graduating with $180,000 plus of student debt. The average lawyer in the state of Florida is making $50,000 a year. That's not a sustainable model. I have been an advocate of taking accreditation of law schools away from the American Bar Association because I think they give them out like candy. I've been an advocate of eliminating the third year of law school, which is, has been done, has been contemplated as a way to both save money and allow those individuals to gain training. So I think whether it's law school or something else, we need to be looking at that with a realization that higher education is big business. And law school is one of the worst examples of how it is huge business for individuals. And somebody is graduating with a massive amount of debt and not necessarily a ton of options in the marketplace to sustain that debt long term.
Last question.
On a different topic, medical marijuana, there's a bill advancing in the House to cap THC levels in medical marijuana. People in the industry, the fast-growing industry in Florida, say that would really hurt what is a fast-growing sector for the agriculture industry. Is the system working, in your opinion? Do you think that it needs that kind of overhaul?
Well, I don't think it's a system overhaul. You're talking about THC caps. I don't think it has anything to do with the system, right? It has to do with what is in the medicine and how much of it do you need. So I think that's a conversation, I've said this in the past, that we deserve to have, right? As a state, as to is this necessary? There are other places, Amsterdam, who I think started this whole thing, right? About marijuana, had THC caps. There's other places who have THC caps. So it's really a question of, I think that the sticker, the advertisement, doesn't always match the reality of what's in there. And I think with something like marijuana, where it hasn't gone through the same medicinal process that everything else has gone through with an FDA, I think it's appropriate, given that this was more of a political creation than a creation of science, that we go and we verify, hey, does this make sense? And I think that's all we're doing. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.